Hey there guys, Virtus here and welcome back to my Unreal Engine 4 Level Design Essentials series. In today's video what we're going to be doing is deleting all of the lights in our scene and then building our lighting from scratch. Now in the last video we went over a couple of the different types of lights and what they do. However, what I want to do is get rid of all of the lights in our scene and build it from scratch so you can see how all of the different lighting components work together and how you can use them to get the best results for both a visually pleasing level and also an optimized level. What we're also going to be talking about is a couple of the lighting best practices to make sure your lighting is as efficient as possible. Now, for the level that we've got in front of us, we actually use the default lighting template. Now, for those of you that want a little bit more control over your level, what you could do is start from empty level and just chuck all of the different lighting components into here. What I'm going to be doing is keeping the scene that I've got at the moment and then deleting all the lights and then putting them in so you can better see how they react with the different components like foliages inside of buildings and all of that good stuff. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive straight into it. So what I need to do then is delete all of the lights from my scene. Now, in addition to the lights, there's also a couple of lighting components that we need to work with as a level designer, and I'm going to be deleting those and recreating those, and that is the importance of this video. So in the world outliner, in the top right hand corner, you need to go ahead and find your lighting folder, as within here you're going to have most of your lighting components. So the first one is your directional light, your light source. This is your main light source for the level and essentially acts as the sun. If I delete this and press yes by pressing the delete key on my keyboard, you are going to notice our scene goes really dark, and that's exactly what we want. Next up, the next component we'll be replacing and deleting is our light mass importance volume. This essentially tells the engine which part of your level lighting do you want to prioritize for the best quality. So I'm going to delete this. Moving on, we're going to keep the post-processing volume as we do like that, and it's not necessarily a lighting component. I'm going to delete my skylight, which is essentially the engine's way of capturing reflections from the atmosphere or the environment rather, and then reflecting it onto our components. So even though we've got no light source, because there is light from the sky, it's going to look a little bit lit up. Delete that and you are going to see the difference. Moving on, underneath render effects, we've got a couple of things that we need to delete as well. So first things first, we've got our atmospheric fog, which is going to give the sky the foggy lighting look. Moving on from there, what we also need to delete is our sphere for the sky sphere, which is essentially a massive dome which projects things like clouds and the color of the horizon and the stars and stuff onto that. We'll be replacing this all a little bit later, but hopefully by going through these one by one and explaining what they do, you guys can see just how many components it takes to make a lighting or a level which looks good in terms of lighting. Your end result, if you delete everything, should be a completely pitch black environment similar to this. Now, one thing that I haven't done is deleted my two lights here, so the point light and the spotlight, as you guys, if you've watched the last video, should completely understand how these work. So moving on, let's go ahead and show you how we can create all the lighting. So in the placing mode, in the modes panel, go to lights, and the first thing you want to do is implement a directional light actor. And you can do this by clicking, dragging and dropping it into your scene, and this is going to be your main light source for the level. So with this, what you can do with this is the main function is going to be rotating this. So with this, so for example, if you don't want your shadows to go onto your main playable area, you could just rotate the sun's position essentially to move it to like a sunset position, a midday position where it's top down like I have done now. So the shadows are directly beneath the trees, which is quite nice. And this is just one of the many things you've got to think about as a level designer when you're setting up the lighting for your level. You do not want to have big shadows going into the playable areas if that's not what you're looking for. But I'm sort of happy with what we've got here. I've got a little bit of light going into this room, which is quite nice, and it's going to reflect into the rest of the room when we build our lighting. So moving on, the next component that we need, if you're happy with the rest of your settings for your directional light, those settings being things like the intensity, I sort of like to go with like a 3, and that's usually okay, but it's going to vary on the look and the style that you're after. But if you're happy with the rest of this stuff, you can experiment with that if you want to. You can move on to the next component, and the next component that I add in is our atmospheric fog, which is essentially a placeable fog actor that simulates atmospheric light scattering. If I click and drag that into my scene, you are going to see exactly what that does. So what it's going to do is give you a little bit of fog in the distance, and I can change the color of this to control my sort of horizon, how the sky looks. Now for me, I generally go with a white and let the rest of the lighting components do it, but for me I'm just going to add a little bit of a blue tint and press OK, and I'm completely happy with this. What you could do is then play around with things like the sun multiplier, the fog multiplier, so you can make it more foggy. It's entirely up to you. I'm not going to sit here and go through all the settings, just experiment with those and try and get the look and the style that you're after. Now, one of the next things that we've got to work on is the skylight, and what this is going to do, like I said previously, is essentially take light from the environment and reflect it onto the rest of our scene. And where this comes in handy, as you'll notice in this room, the shadows are pitch black underneath the trees. The shadows are pitch black, and that is not what it's going to be like in real life, because light will reflect from everywhere in the environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my lights tab, click and drag in a skylight, and notice as soon as I do that, the shadows become a lot smoother and a lot more lifelike. And within this room here, you can now see the walls, even though there is no direct light source in there. So you got light coming through the door and then bouncing off onto the walls there, which is nice. And for this to work, you do need to have your atmospheric fog in the distance, just lighting up the scene a little bit. With this, you can play around with the light color, and you can also play around with the intensity. Those are the two main settings. If you turn up the intensity, you can make it brighter, you can make it darker, and this is going to apply to everywhere. Now, realistically, you are just going to want to leave this on 1, as that is where it works best. So moving on from here, we need a couple of other things. So the next thing that we need then, if we go into this, is our light mass importance volume. Now, like I said earlier, what this is going to do is essentially tell the engine which part of the level to prioritize when you are building the lighting for your scene. So you want to put this on your main playable areas, as if you have a big volume, it is going to prioritize everything, and it's going to be a massive pain on the performance. So like it was before, what I'm going to do is just use my transformation tools to scale this little light mass importance volume that I've dragged in, and I'm just going to get it to cover the main area, which for me is sort of going to be the trees and also the little main area that I've got here. Now you can either scale it using the transformation tools, or in the details panel, you could just set the scale manually. So I could set this to like 50 by 50 by 25 and then just move it into place just like that. So you can see here now then that our scene is really starting to come to life. It's very similar to how it was before, and that is because we have got pretty much all of the actors in there and we understand how most of these work as well. Now the last type of actor that we have got is our sky sphere, and this is something created by Epic Games to give you the moving clouds and stars and all of that good stuff. So let's go ahead and put that in there. So in the little search classes panel at the top here, just type in sky sphere. Click and drag and drop it into your scene, and notice now then that our scene is going to go orange in the sky. And what this is doing is essentially simulating a sun height and turning that into a sky sphere. Now this sky sphere is entirely optional. If you wanted to, you could just use the atmospheric fog, but using this sky sphere you can get things like clouds and stars and so on. Some of the main settings you want to play around with in here, in the details panel with the sky sphere selected, is your sun height. At the moment it's sort of at like a sunset position. So if I adjust this, you can make it like a nighttime position when the sun is all the way down essentially, or you can move it all the way up and have a sun up position. Now you can also see it projects a little image of the sun into the sky here. So what you want to try and do with this is just line this up with your directional light. So what I'm going to do is raise this sort of all the way up to 1 midway as my shadows are pointing down, my directional light is pointing down similar to that, and by having that in the right position it's going to look really nice. With this you can see we got some clouds here. We can change the opacity up to have more clouds or less clouds. It was on about 0.6 before and that looked nice, but if you want more clouds you can play around with that. You've also got some stars, but they're not really going to show unless your sun height is all the way down like this. So stars, I can make them brighter or lower, it's entirely up to you, but you guys can play around with those to get your scene to look the way that you want it to do. Now that's pretty much everything for lighting the scene itself. So now what we need to do is essentially get rid of some issues that we have with our lighting. Now one of the main things is our shadows. It's gonna say preview underneath them. So that is because we have not built the lighting, and the way that Unreal Engine 4's lighting system works is you are going to have a light map which is essentially pre-computed light data, which basically the player can load up and dump into the level, and from there it doesn't have to dynamically load every single shadow for every asset, every point light and all of that good stuff. And the way that you can do this and make that light map data is by going to build and then building your lighting. Now building your lighting can take a lot of time, and one of the ways to quickly go through that is to change your lighting quality to preview instead of production, high or medium. Preview is for like a quick check, whereas production is going to be your final quality testing. So you do this just before you send off your game for release, you know, that kind of stuff. And one other thing that I wanted to mention before I go any further is when you're working with point lights, if you have too many of them close together, which I'm going to show you now, you are going to notice quickly enough that some of them are going to get this red X on them, and that is because I have too many lights too close together and the required resolution for the light map is just going to be too high. It's just not going to work. So just be very careful about your point light and spotlight and your lighting placement. Just be careful with it, but for now you can see and you should have better control over your lighting in your scene. You should know how all the elements work and should be able to work with the difference between a nighttime scene, a daytime scene, a sunset scene and all of that good stuff. So what I'm going to do is end off the video here, but make sure you do go ahead and build your lighting every so often. Once again guys, thanks for watching, stay awesome, keep creating. Your boy Vertus, signing out. This video was made possible by my supporters on Patreon. If you want more videos like this, check out my Patreon page using the link in the description. To stay up to date on new releases, make sure you follow us on social media.